Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we wander slowly into a city that hums with quiet ambition and creative fire. It is early morning in Florence, sometime in the early 1500s. The sky is pale, the air cool enough that you can see the faint mist of your breath as you walk. Ahead of you rise tall stone walls and red-tiled roofs that seem to glow softly in the first light of dawn. Somewhere in the distance, a bell begins to ring, low and steady, echoing across narrow streets. Bakers are already awake. Somewhere a donkey cart rattles across cobblestones, and you traveller are about to spend a day inside one of the most fascinating cities in history. Florence at this moment is buzzing with artists, bankers, priests, merchants, and ambitious families all trying to shape the future. It is beautiful, inspiring, occasionally chaotic, and if we are being honest, a little dangerous too. In fact, if you were an ordinary person suddenly dropped into Renaissance Florence, you might discover very quickly that survival requires quick thinking, strong lungs for walking uphill streets, and perhaps a tolerance for questionable sanitation. So yes, you probably would not survive this long term. But tonight you only need to stroll, observe and breathe in the atmosphere. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, tell me where in the world you are listening from and what your local time is right now. It is always fascinating to imagine listeners scattered across different time zones while we all quietly wander through the same sleeping city together. Now dim the lights and imagine yourself standing outside the Porta San Gallo, one of the gates that allows travellers into Florence. The great wooden doors creak open as the city wakes. Guards lean on long spears, watching carts and pedestrians pass through. You step across the threshold and immediately feel the shift in energy. Outside the walls, the countryside stretches with vineyards and olive trees. Inside, the air grows thicker with the smells of people, animals, bread, ovens, leather and damp stone. You walk slowly down a street paved with uneven blocks of grey rock, polished smooth by centuries of feet. The houses rise tall on either side, their windows narrow and shaded by wooden shutters. Laundry hangs above you like quiet banners, swaying in the morning breeze. Somewhere nearby, a woman pours water from a bucket onto the street, the small stream trickling along the gutter. Florence in the early 1500s holds around 60,000 residents. For its time, this makes it one of the largest cities in Europe, though by modern standards it still feels intimate. You could walk from one side of the city to the other in less than an hour if you were determined enough. Of course, you would probably stop every few steps because something interesting always seems to be happening. As you move deeper into the city, the enormous dome of the cathedral begins to appear above the rooftops. The massive structure dominates the skyline like a quiet guardian. The dome was completed decades earlier by the brilliant architect Filippo Brunelleschi, and even now it remains one of the most astonishing engineering achievements in Europe. People still stop in the streets simply to stare up at it. You do the same, tilting your head back until the red tiles fill your vision. The bell tower nearby stretches upward like a slender stone ladder, reaching for the sky. Its surface is decorated with coloured marble panels that glow pink and white in the early sunlight. A group of apprentices carrying tools passes you laughing and pushing each other as they hurry toward a workshop. Florence is full of these young apprentices. Boys as young as 12 often leave their families to train in trades that might shape the rest of their lives. The street begins to grow busier. A baker opens the wooden shutters of his shop, releasing a warm cloud of scent that drifts out to greet the morning. The smell of fresh bread is almost hypnotic. Your stomach reminds you that breakfast in this era might be far simpler than what you are used to. Bread, perhaps a bit of cheese, maybe watered wine. Coffee has not yet arrived in Europe, so the Florentines start their day without that modern miracle. You continue walking toward the heart of the city. Hooves clatter against the stones as a horse pulls a small cart piled with wool bundles. Florence built much of its wealth on the wool trade. Raw wool arrives from across Europe, and local workshops clean, dye, spin and weave it into fine cloth that is sold in distant markets. This textile industry forms the backbone of the Florentine economy. Wealthy guilds control production and maintain strict quality standards. These guilds also hold enormous political influence, shaping laws and city policies. When people talk about Florence as a republic, they often forget that power is carefully balanced among merchant elites who guard their influence very closely. A group of men gathers near a fountain, speaking quietly. Politics is always present here. Decisions about taxes, alliances, and trade ripple through daily conversation like the weather. Florence has experienced revolutions, exiles, and dramatic political swings in recent decades. One moment, a powerful family dominates the city. The next moment, they are forced to flee. Among the most famous families are the Medici. Their banking empire stretches across Europe, and their patronage has supported countless artists and scholars. Even when they officially lose political control, their influence rarely disappears completely. As you wander through a small square, you notice a curious detail that might surprise modern visitors. Many Florentine homes include small stone benches built into the outside walls. These benches allow neighbours or passers-by to sit and chat in the street. It creates a sort of public living room where conversations drift freely between strangers. It is a charming feature, though it also means gossip spreads with remarkable speed. Speaking of gossip, there is one slightly odd rumour floating through the city. Some Florentines believe that certain artists mix unusual ingredients into their paints to create special effects. Egg yolk is common in tempera painting, but you might hear whispers about more exotic additions such as fig sap or even ground gemstones. Whether these tales are true or simply colourful exaggerations is something scholars still debate. You pass beneath a narrow archway where sunlight suddenly fades into cool shadow. The air smells faintly of damp stone and old wood. A cat watches you from the edge of a window ledge, tail flicking lazily. Florence is a city of contrasts. Grand palaces stand only a few streets away from cramped homes where families crowd into single rooms. Wealth and poverty live side by side here, sharing the same narrow streets. A musician begins tuning a lute somewhere nearby, the soft plucked notes drifting through the morning air. You pause for a moment, letting the sounds settle around you. The day is only just beginning. Workshops are opening. Markets will soon fill with voices. Artists are preparing pigments and chisels. Merchants will haggle over prices. Priests will lead prayers. And somewhere in the city, a young apprentice might already be sketching ideas that will someday become a masterpiece. You take another slow breath of the cool morning air and continue walking deeper into Florence, where the streets are beginning to wake. You continue along the narrow street, and as the morning grows brighter, the city begins to stretch awake around you. The quiet calm of dawn slowly gives way to a gentle hum of activity. Doors creak open. Wooden shutters clap against stone walls. Somewhere a rooster crows as if determined to remind everyone that sleep is officially over. The street widens gradually until you emerge into a lively piazza. It's not yet fully crowded, but the first wave of daily commerce has already begun. Merchants arrange baskets of vegetables, wheels of cheese, and bundles of herbs onto rough wooden tables. A man carrying a sack of onions nearly bumps into you, muttering an apology before disappearing into the crowd. Markets are the beating heart of Florence. Almost every neighbourhood has its own smaller gathering of stalls, though some squares become particularly famous trading spots. The most bustling market of all sits near the Mercato Vecchio, a lively maze of vendors selling everything from bread to cloth to mysterious powders, whose exact purpose you might not want to investigate too closely. You drift toward a bread stall where golden loaves sit stacked in neat rows. The baker is already surrounded by customers. Bread is a staple here, eaten with nearly every meal. Interestingly, Florentine bread is often made without salt. This curious tradition goes back centuries and may have begun during a political dispute with the nearby city of Pisa, which once controlled the salt supply. Whether the salt-free recipe began as protest or simply economic necessity is still discussed by historians today. A woman beside you purchases a loaf and tears off a piece, immediately handing it to a small child who looks half asleep but very pleased. The smell of warm crust fills the air, rich and comforting. Nearby another stall displays long strings of garlic, onions and dried peppers. A young merchant enthusiastically describes the quality of his goods to anyone willing to listen. His voice rises above the crowd with impressive confidence. Selling here requires energy, patience, and perhaps a small talent for theatrical exaggeration. You notice the clothing people wear as they move through the square. The wealthier merchants wrap themselves in colourful fabrics and carefully tailored garments. Their sleeves are wide and elegant, often lined with fur or embroidered trim. Meanwhile, labourers wear simpler tunics and sturdy boots that have clearly seen many miles of cobblestone. Clothing in Florence can reveal quite a bit about a person's social standing. In fact, the city government occasionally passes laws called sumptuary regulations that attempt to control excessive displays of wealth in clothing. Officials worry that extravagant outfits might cause envy or social disorder. Of course, creative Florentines often find clever ways around these rules. As you wander deeper into the market, you hear the steady clink of metal. A small table displays knives, scissors, and tools forged by a local blacksmith. The blades catch the sunlight in bright flashes as customers pick them up to inspect their weight. Next to this table sits a man selling spices. His stall smells like a distant world. Cinnamon, pepper, saffron and cloves rest in tiny piles of vibrant colour. These spices travel long distances through complicated trade routes that stretch across the Mediterranean and beyond. When you breathe in their scent, you are inhaling the aroma of global commerce. Spices are extremely valuable here. A small pouch of saffron might cost more than a worker earns in several days. Merchants guard these goods carefully, weighing them on delicate scales to ensure every transaction is precise. A few steps away, another vendor sells live chickens, which squawk loudly in wooden cages. The birds flap their wings and protest as curious buyers examine them. Life in Renaissance markets is rarely quiet. You hear music again. This time a small group of street performers has arrived. One man plays a fiddle while another taps a small drum. A third performer balances on a narrow plank placed across two barrels, attempting a slightly wobbly acrobatic routine. Children gather quickly, laughing and clapping. Street entertainment is a common sight in Florence. Performers wander from square to square hoping for coins or perhaps a piece of bread. Their acts range from juggling to storytelling to comedic plays that poke gentle fun at local politics. As you pause to watch, you overhear a pair of merchants discussing business in low voices. They talk about shipments arriving from distant ports and the rising cost of wool. Commerce here is not limited to the local market stalls. Florence is deeply connected to trade networks stretching across Europe and the Mediterranean. In fact, the city has built a reputation as one of the most important financial centres of its time. Florentine bankers manage accounts for king's merchants and even the papacy itself. The coins that pass through these markets often represent much larger systems of credit and investment operating quietly behind the scenes. You continue walking and pass a curious sight. A small crowd has gathered around a travelling healer who claims to sell remedies for nearly every illness imaginable. Bottles of cloudy liquid sit on his table beside bundles of dried herbs. He enthusiastically describes how one mixture strengthens the lungs while another improves memory. One of his bottles contains something particularly strange, a powder made from crushed pearls, he claims, which, when mixed with wine, will restore vitality. Whether this treatment actually works is highly questionable. Still, the crowd listens with interest. Strange remedies are not uncommon in this era. Medical knowledge blends practical observation with traditional beliefs and sometimes pure imagination. Scholars continue to debate how many of these remedies had genuine benefits and how many were simply hopeful experiments. The sun climbs higher, warming the stone walls around the square. The early chill of morning fades into comfortable warmth. More people arrive with baskets, carts and animals. Voices overlap in a cheerful chaos of bargaining and laughter. You step aside to avoid a pair of donkeys carrying heavy sacks of grain. Their hooves make hollow sounds against the stones. The animals move patiently through the crowd as if they have navigated this busy market 1,000 times before. The city feels alive now. Bells ring again in the distance, marking the passing of another hour. The scent of roasting meat drifts from a nearby tavern where the cook has begun preparing the midday meal. You realise that the market is only one small piece of Florence's daily rhythm. Beyond these stalls lie workshops filled with artists, homes where families begin their routines, churches preparing for prayers, and palaces where powerful figures quietly shape the city's future. You leave the bustling square and slip into a quieter side street. The sounds of bargaining and music fade behind you, replaced by the steady echo of your footsteps on the stones. Ahead, the tall walls of Florentine homes rise like silent guardians of private life, and soon you will step inside. The street grows quieter as you move away from the lively market. The sounds of merchants and musicians soften into a distant murmur behind you. Here, the pace of Florence changes. Tall stone houses lean close together, their upper floors nearly touching above the narrow lane. Sunlight filters down in thin golden strips that slowly slide along the walls. You stop in front of a large wooden door set into a thick stone frame. From the outside, the house looks sturdy and a little severe. Florentine homes rarely show much decoration on the street side. Wealth is often hidden behind plain walls, partly for security, and partly because city culture values modesty in public display. The heavy door creaks open and you step into a cool entry hall. The sudden change in temperature feels refreshing after the warmth of the street. Inside the house is arranged around a small open courtyard. Light pours down from above, illuminating a simple stone well at the centre. Many homes in Florence follow this design. The courtyard provides fresh air and a place for daily chores. It is where water is drawn, laundry is washed, and occasionally where a family cat stretches lazily in the sun. A woman carrying a wooden bucket crosses the courtyard, nodding politely as she passes. Household work begins early here. Families rise shortly after dawn because daylight is precious. There are no electric lamps to stretch the evening hours. Most tasks must be completed before darkness settles. You climb a short staircase made of worn stone. The steps dip slightly in the middle from generations of feet passing over them. Upstairs the rooms are small but carefully arranged. A narrow window lets in a soft breeze that carries the faint scent of baking bread from somewhere down the street. A typical Florentine household includes several generations living together under one roof. Parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes apprentices or servants share the same building. Privacy in the modern sense is limited and family life unfolds in close quarters. In the main room, a long wooden table sits beside a hearth built into the wall. The hearth serves as both kitchen and gathering place. A pot hangs over the coals, gently steaming as someone prepares the morning meal. You notice how simple the furniture is. Chairs are sturdy, but plain carved from dark wood. Chests line the walls, storing clothing and linens. These chests are often among the most valuable pieces of furniture in the house. Some are beautifully painted with scenes from mythology or family history. One particularly interesting object catches your attention, a painted marriage chest known as a cassone. These ornate chests are traditionally given as wedding gifts and filled with linens, clothing, and personal treasures. Wealthy families commission artists to decorate them with elaborate images. It is a small reminder that even in daily household life, art finds its way into Florence. Breakfast is modest. A loaf of bread is sliced and placed on the table along with a small bowl of olives and a wedge of cheese. A jug of watered wine sits nearby. Drinking diluted wine throughout the day is common because water sources are not always perfectly clean. You sit quietly as the household gathers. Conversation is calm but steady. People discuss errands, trade, and news from the city. Gossip travels quickly through Florence. A merchant's success, a new artistic commission, or a political rumour can become the topic of the morning. One widely accepted fact about Florentine families is that they place enormous importance on lineage and reputation. Family names carry weight here. A good reputation can open doors to business partnerships and marriages. A damaged reputation, however, might follow a person for decades. Children in the household begin their own routines soon after breakfast. Boys from wealthier families may attend lessons in reading, writing, and mathematics. Some are sent to study Latin and classical literature, part of the growing humanist movement that values ancient Greek and Roman learning. Girls usually remain at home learning domestic skills such as sewing, cooking, and managing household accounts. Though some daughters from elite families receive education in reading, and music expectations remain focused on preparing them for marriage. A curious little detail about Renaissance households involves pets. While dogs and cats are the most common companions, records mention stranger creatures living in Florentine homes. Wealthy families sometimes keep exotic animals brought back from distant travels. Monkeys, for instance, occasionally appear in paintings and written descriptions of elite households. Whether these animals are beloved companions or simply fashionable curiosities is still debated by scholars today. You wander into a smaller chamber where several beds stand against the walls. Beds are often shared by multiple family members, especially children. Thick wool blankets lie folded neatly across wooden frames. In colder months, the stone houses can become quite chilly, so families use heavy curtains and layered bedding to stay warm. The thick walls help regulate temperature, keeping interiors cooler during hot summers and slightly warmer during winter nights. Downstairs, the courtyard has become busier. A servant scrubs clothing in a basin while another sorts vegetables for the evening meal. The sound of water splashing echoes softly between the stone walls. Domestic work never truly ends in a Renaissance household. Bread must be baked, clothing mended, floors swept, and fires maintained. Much of this labour falls on women and servants, who keep the household running quietly behind the scenes. As you lean against the cool wall of the courtyard, you hear distant bells ringing again. Florence is a city guided by the sound of bells. Churches mark the hours of the day, calling people to prayer and reminding them of time passing. Life here moves according to rhythms that feel both busy and strangely calm. Work, family, faith, and community blend together in patterns repeated day after day. You step back toward the front door and glance once more at the quiet courtyard. Behind these stone walls, families laugh, argue, cook, and sleep. Their lives unfold far from the grand artworks and political dramas that later generations will celebrate. Yet these ordinary households form the true foundation of Florence. You push the door open and step once more into the street, where the sounds of workshops and hammering tools have begun to echo through the neighbourhood. The artisans of Florence are starting their day. You step back into the street and immediately notice how the atmosphere has shifted again. The quiet domestic calm behind household walls fades, replaced by the purposeful rhythm of work. The sounds of Florence are different here. Instead of market chatter, you hear hammering, scraping, grinding, and the occasional frustrated sigh of someone trying to perfect a delicate task. Workshops line this street, their wide doors open to welcome light and customers. Inside each space, a different craft unfolds. Florence is a city built not only on beauty and philosophy, but also on skilled hands. Painters, sculptors, metalworkers, weavers, bookbinders, and countless other artisans shape the daily economy. You pause outside a painter's workshop where the smell of pigments and oil drifts out into the street. Inside, several young apprentices are already at work. One carefully grinds coloured minerals with a stone pestle, slowly turning rough fragments into fine powder. Another mixes pigments with egg yolk to create tempera paint, stirring patiently until the texture becomes smooth. Training as an artist here begins early. Apprenticeships usually start when a boy is around 12 or 13 years old. For years he will clean tools, prepare materials, and copy drawings made by the master of the workshop. Only after long practice will he be trusted with important tasks. This system produces extraordinary results. Florence becomes famous across Europe for the quality of its artists and craftsmen. Patrons travel from distant regions hoping to commission paintings, sculptures, and architectural designs. Inside the workshop, the master painter studies a large wooden panel propped against the wall. A half-finished religious scene spreads across its surface. Figures are sketched lightly in charcoal, their outlines waiting for layers of colour and shading. A well-established detail known from surviving workshop records is that Renaissance artists often produced work collaboratively. The master designed the composition and painted the most important sections, while apprentices filled in backgrounds, clothing, or decorative elements. This teamwork allowed large commissions to be completed more efficiently. One apprentice lifts a small brush and carefully adds delicate gold leaf to a halo. The thin metal catches the light and glows warmly against the painted wood. You notice The walls of the studio are covered with sketches, faces, hands, animals, and architectural studies appear in charcoal lines across dozens of sheets. These drawings act as practice and reference material. Artists constantly observe the world around them, searching for ways to capture movement, emotion, and proportion. There is an unusual rumour circulating among some modern researchers about Renaissance workshops. Certain artists may have experimented with ingredients that sound more like kitchen supplies than painting materials. Garlic juice, vinegar, and even honey sometimes appear in old recipes for preparing pigments or preserving brushes. Whether these methods were widespread or simply occasional experiments remains an open question that art historians continue to discuss. You thank the painter with a polite nod and move on. Next door, the atmosphere changes dramatically. The clang of metal rings through the air as you step into a goldsmith's shop. The space is smaller and darker, lit by a narrow window and the glow of a small furnace. A goldsmith sits hunched over a workbench, carefully shaping a thin strip of metal into an intricate pattern. His tools are tiny and precise. Each movement is slow and deliberate. Goldsmiths hold a respected position in Florentine society. Their work requires extreme precision, and many famous artists actually begin their training in these workshops. Working with metal teaches patience and careful observation. One famous example is the artist Benvenuto Cellini, who trained as a goldsmith before becoming a celebrated sculptor. His autobiography later describes the intense competition and pride that filled these craft communities. You watch as the goldsmith lifts a magnifying lens to inspect a small ring. The piece is decorated with delicate engravings that form swirling leaves and vines. Nearby, an apprentice pumps the bellows of the furnace, feeding air into the flames. The fire brightens and the metal begins to glow softly. Leaving the goldsmith behind, you continue down the street and enter yet another workshop. This one smells strongly of wet clay. Here, a sculptor works beside a large block of marble. Stone dust covers the floor like pale snow. The sculptor lifts a hammer and chisel, striking the surface with steady rhythm. Each tap sends tiny fragments falling away. Marble arrives in Florence from quarries in Carrara, a region known for its bright white stone. Transporting these massive blocks to the city requires careful planning and strong animals to haul them across difficult terrain. You watch the sculptor pause, stepping back to examine the emerging figure. Slowly, a human form begins to appear within the stone. The process feels almost magical, as if the artist is revealing something that has always been hidden inside the marble. One curious detail from Renaissance workshop life involves the practice of studying human anatomy. Some artists quietly attend dissections in order to understand how muscles and bones move beneath the skin. This knowledge allows them to create more lifelike figures in their sculptures and paintings. Whether all artists participate in these studies is still debated by historians, but the growing interest in anatomy certainly influences Renaissance art. The workshop is warm and dusty, and after a few minutes, you step back outside into the street. Florence continues to buzz around you. Apprentices hurry between shops, carrying tools or supplies. A messenger runs past with a sealed letter. Somewhere nearby, a hammer strikes metal in steady rhythm like a heartbeat. It becomes clear that this city is powered by creativity and labour working side by side. Behind every masterpiece stands a network of workshops, assistants and craftsmen whose names may never appear in history books. You walk slowly onward, listening to the music of chisels and brushes shaping the world of Renaissance Florence. And somewhere ahead, beyond these busy streets of artisans, the quiet influence of powerful patrons continues to shape the city's destiny. You continue along the street of workshops. but the character of the city begins to change again. The narrow artisan lanes slowly open into broader avenues lined with taller buildings. These structures feel heavier, more imposing. Their stone blocks carefully cut and stacked into smooth fortress-like walls. The sound of chisels and grinding pigments fades behind you, replaced by quieter footsteps and the occasional echo of carriage wheels. You have entered a district where power lives. Florence may call itself a republic, but influence in this city often gathers around certain families whose wealth stretches far beyond the city walls. Among them, none carries a name spoken more often than the Medici. Ahead of you rises a massive structure that dominates the street. Palazzo Medici stands like a stone mountain carved into careful geometry. The walls are built from huge rusticated blocks, rough at the bottom, and gradually smoother as they rise upward. The building looks both elegant and intimidating, a perfect balance of strength and sophistication. You pause across the street, watching the quiet activity around its entrance. Servants move in and out carrying baskets and letters. A pair of men dressed in fine robes speak in low voices near the doorway. Guards stand nearby, their posture relaxed but attentive. Nothing here feels chaotic like the market. Everything moves with measured purpose. A widely accepted point among historians is that the Medici family built its fortune primarily through banking. By the early 15th century, their financial network stretched across Europe. Branches of the Medici Bank operated in cities such as Rome, Venice, Bruges, and London. Their ledgers recorded transactions for merchants, nobles, and even the papacy. This financial web allowed the Medici to gather enormous influence without always holding official political titles. Inside the palazzo, which you unfortunately cannot wander into freely, today life revolves around business meetings, diplomatic conversations, and careful planning. Wealthy clients discuss loans. Messengers arrive carrying news from distant cities. Advisors review account books thick with columns of numbers. Yet the Medici are not known only for money. Their family becomes famous for something else as well. Patronage. Many of the artworks that define the Renaissance exist because families like the Medici chose to support artists, scholars, and architects. By funding creative minds, they not only decorate Florence with beauty, but also strengthen their own reputation as cultured leaders. Cosimo de' Medici, often called Cosimo the Elder, establishes this tradition during the previous century. His grandson Lorenzo, later known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, continues it with enthusiasm. Under Lorenzo's guidance, Florence becomes a magnet for artists and thinkers eager to test new ideas. It is said that Lorenzo enjoys surrounding himself with poets, philosophers, and painters. His court hosts lively discussions about literature and ancient philosophy. Some evenings even include music and dramatic performances. The atmosphere sounds almost like an early intellectual salon. One charming anecdote, occasionally mentioned in Renaissance letters, involves Lorenzo inviting young artists to dine at his table. During these gatherings, the conversation might drift between poetry, sculpture, and politics, while servants refill cups of wine. Whether every detail of these stories is accurate is still uncertain, but they capture the sense that creativity and power often mingle in unexpected ways. You glance again at the tall windows of the palazzo. Behind those walls, decisions are made that influence the entire city. Florence has experienced political turmoil before. Rival factions sometimes challenge Medici authority. At times the family is forced into exile, only to return again when alliances shift. One particularly dramatic moment in Florentine history occurs during the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478, members of the rival Pazzi family attempt to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during a church service inside the cathedral. The plot fails to kill Lorenzo, though Giuliano sadly loses his life. The aftermath reshapes Florentine politics for years. Some historians still debate the deeper motivations behind the conspiracy and how widespread the support for it truly was. Political alliances in Renaissance Italy were rarely simple. As you walk slowly past the palazzo, you notice small details carved into the stone. The Medici coat of arms appears repeatedly marked by a pattern of red spheres arranged across a shield. These symbols quietly remind everyone who holds influence here. Further down the street, another elegant residence appears. This palace belongs to a different wealthy family, yet its design echoes the same architectural language of strength and refinement. Florentine elites compete not only in commerce, but also in architecture. Building a magnificent palace becomes a way to demonstrate status and cultural sophistication. Still, not all citizens view these displays with admiration. Some worry that concentrated wealth might threaten the balance of the Republic. Political debates often simmer quietly beneath the surface of daily life. As you pass a shaded corner, two men speak in hushed voices about city governance. One gestures toward the palazzo behind you, lowering his voice even further. Florence thrives on commerce and creativity, but it also lives with constant political tension. You continue walking until the large buildings gradually give way to more open streets. The air feels slightly lighter again. In the distance you hear a familiar sound rising above rooftops. Church bells. Their steady rhythm spreads across Florence like gentle waves, reminding the city that the next moment of the day has arrived. Faith shapes life here as strongly as politics or trade, and soon you will follow those bells into one of the sacred spaces that guide the spiritual rhythm of Renaissance Florence. The bells continue ringing as you follow their sound through the streets. Each deep note spreads across the city like ripples in water. People pause briefly as the sound passes over them. Some bow their heads, others simply glance toward the nearest church tower before continuing their work. In Florence, bells are not only music, they act almost like the city's clock, announcing hours, gatherings, celebrations, and sometimes warnings. Their voices echo across rooftops from dozens of churches scattered through the neighbourhoods. You walk toward the largest of them all. The cathedral rises ahead of you with quiet grandeur. Santa Maria del Fiore dominates the skyline, its enormous dome glowing warm red beneath the midday sun. Up close, the marble walls reveal intricate patterns of white, green and pink stone, arranged like a geometric tapestry. Visitors from across Europe travel to see this building. Even people who live in Florence still look up at it with a sense of pride. A widely recognised historical detail is that construction of the cathedral began in the late 13th century and continued for generations. Architects, engineers and artists all contributed to its design across decades. When Brunelleschi completed the famous dome in the 15th century, many observers considered it one of the greatest architectural accomplishments of the age. You step slowly toward the cathedral doors. The square in front of the building is lively but calmer than the market. Travellers admire the architecture while local residents pass through on their way to prayer. The tall bronze doors open and you enter the vast interior. The first thing you notice is the cool air. The thick stone walls hold the temperature steady, creating a quiet refuge from the warmth outside. Your footsteps echo softly across the floor as you walk farther inside. Light filters down through high stained glass windows, casting patches of colour across the stone pillars. The ceiling stretches upwards so far that your eyes take a moment to adjust to the scale of the space. Church life forms a central rhythm for many Florentines. People attend Mass, participate in religious festivals, and gather here for important life events such as weddings and baptisms. The church also provides charity for the poor and guidance for the community. You notice several people kneeling quietly in prayer. A priest moves slowly along the aisle, speaking in a soft voice to a small group of worshippers. Faith during the Renaissance blends devotion with daily routine. Even merchants who spend the morning negotiating prices may stop briefly to light a candle or whisper a prayer for good fortune. Near one of the side chapels, you see a small painting glowing in the candlelight. The colours appear rich and luminous. Many chapels within Florentine churches contain artwork donated by wealthy families who hope to honour their faith while also preserving their legacy. Commissioning religious art becomes a way to combine spiritual devotion with public reputation. Families sponsor altarpieces, sculptures and frescoes that decorate sacred spaces for generations. As you wander deeper into the cathedral, your gaze lifts upward toward the inside of the dome. Painted scenes swirl across the enormous curved surface above. Figures of angels, saints, and dramatic biblical moments stretch across the ceiling like a vast painted sky. Artists often spend years completing such frescoes. Working high above the ground requires scaffolding and remarkable patience. You pause near a group of visitors discussing a curious story connected to Renaissance faith. Some records mention that Florentines occasionally carried small written prayers or charms believed to offer protection from illness or bad luck. These objects might be sewn into clothing or kept inside small containers worn around the neck. Whether these charms were viewed as harmless symbols of faith or frowned upon as superstition is something researchers still discuss today. Renaissance spirituality often blended official religious teaching with older folk traditions that lingered quietly in everyday life. The cathedral begins to fill slowly as midday approaches. People arrive for prayer conversation or simply a moment of reflection away from the noise of the city. You step back outside into the sunlight. The square feels brighter after the dim interior. Pigeons scatter as children run across the open space. A street vendor nearby sells small pastries to passers-by, the sweet scent drifting across the plaza. From here you can see the tall bell tower standing beside the cathedral like a watchful companion. Its marble panels glow softly under the sun. Religious life in Florence does not exist only inside grand cathedrals. Smaller churches appear throughout every neighbourhood, each with its own traditions and gatherings. Monasteries and convents also play important roles in the community, offering places of study, prayer, and sometimes quiet refuge from the outside world. As you begin walking again, you pass a friar moving through the crowd. His simple robes contrast sharply with the elegant clothing of wealthy merchants nearby. Florence has witnessed powerful religious voices over the years. One famous figure, the fiery preacher Girolamo Savonarola, once filled these streets with passionate sermons calling for moral reform. His dramatic rise and eventual downfall remain one of the most intense chapters in the city's spiritual history. Historians continue to explore how deeply his message influenced everyday citizens and whether his movement represented genuine spiritual awakening or political upheaval disguised as religious reform. You glance back at the cathedral one more time before turning into a nearby street. The bells have grown quiet again. Work resumes across the city. Shops reopen, carts roll forward, and conversations rise once more. And somewhere nearby, kitchens are beginning to prepare the next meal of the day. The comforting smells of bread, herbs, and simmering stews are already drifting through the air. You leave the bright cathedral square behind and wander into a narrower street, where the sounds of cooking drift gently through open windows. Florence, for all its art and politics, also runs on something much simpler. People need to eat. And as the day approaches midday, the entire city begins to smell wonderfully alive. The scent reaches you before you even see the tavern. Warm bread, simmering beans, roasted herbs, and something faintly smoky float through the air. Your stomach, even if it belongs only to the imagination tonight, reacts immediately. You step closer to the open doorway of a small tavern. Inside, the atmosphere is lively but relaxed. Wooden tables fill the room, their surfaces worn smooth by years of elbows and mugs. Sunlight sneaks through the shutters and lands in bright patches across the floor. A cook stands near the hearth, stirring a large pot. The steam rising from it carries the earthy aroma of vegetables and herbs. Nearby, a boy slices bread into thick pieces and stacks them onto a tray. Food in Florence during the Renaissance depends heavily on bread, beans, vegetables, olive oil, and cheese. Meat appears less frequently for ordinary households, though taverns and wealthier families enjoy it more regularly. A commonly accepted observation among historians is that beans play a surprisingly central role in Florentine cuisine. Dishes made from white cannellini beans become so closely associated with the region that later generations sometimes jokingly refer to Florentines as bean eaters. You take a seat near the wall as a serving girl places a simple meal in front of you. A bowl of thick bean stew sits beside a slice of coarse bread. The stew is flavoured with garlic, sage and olive oil, creating a dish that feels hearty and comforting. Across the room, a group of merchants share a bottle of red wine while discussing trade routes. Wine appears with nearly every meal in Florence, though it is often diluted with water. This practice not only stretches the supply, but also softens the strength of the drink. You take a sip from a clay cup and notice how the flavours are rich but rustic. Renaissance wines are rarely as refined as modern varieties, yet they remain an essential part of daily life. One interesting culinary detail from Florentine kitchens involves the use of herbs grown in small household gardens. Rosemary, thyme, sage and parsley frequently appear in recipes. These herbs not only add flavour, but also carry symbolic meanings connected to health and tradition. A cook nearby tosses a handful of chopped herbs into the pot, filling the room with a fresh green fragrance. In a corner of the tavern, an older man begins telling a story to a small audience. His hands move dramatically as he speaks, describing a banquet he once attended in the home of a wealthy merchant. According to his tale, the table held roasted peacocks, decorated with their own colourful feathers, elaborate pastries shaped like castles, and sweet cakes made with honey and almonds. Whether every detail of his story is accurate is open to interpretation, but lavish feasts among the Florentine elite certainly exist. Grand banquets become an opportunity for powerful families to display wealth and hospitality. Multiple courses arrive one after another while musicians perform and servants refill goblets. Yet the everyday meals of most citizens remain far simpler. A curious note recorded in some Renaissance cookbooks mentions an ingredient that might surprise modern listeners. Sugar is still considered something of a luxury. Imported through Mediterranean trade networks, it appears mainly in dishes prepared for wealthy households or special occasions. When sugar is used, cooks often combine it with spices such as cinnamon or nutmeg to create sweet sauces or desserts. You watch as the cook lifts the lid of another pot. Inside, pieces of meat simmer slowly with onions and wine. The scent drifts across the room, causing several diners to glance over hopefully. The tavern owner notices your curiosity and smiles. Meals like this are more than just nourishment. Taverns act as social centres where people exchange news, gossip, and opinions about the city. Conversations rise and fall across the room like waves. Two students at a nearby table discuss their lessons while sketching figures on scraps of paper. At another table, a pair of craftsmen argue gently about the best method for sharpening chisels. Every voice contributes to the quiet orchestra of Florence. You finish the stew and step back outside into the afternoon light. The warmth of the day has deepened, and the streets feel slower now. Many shops remain open, though the pace of activity softens slightly as people pause to eat and rest. A pleasant breeze carries the aroma of baking bread and roasted vegetables through the narrow lanes. As you walk onward, you notice something else about Florentine life. People pay careful attention to how they appear in public. The colours of clothing, the cut of sleeves, the quality of fabric all send quiet signals about status and identity. Ahead of you, a pair of elegantly dressed citizens passes by in garments that shimmer softly in the sunlight. Fashion, it seems, is another language spoken fluently in Renaissance Florence. And soon you will begin to understand what those fabrics and colours truly mean. You continue down the sunlit street, noticing more clearly now how carefully Florentines present themselves in public. Clothing here is more than simple protection from weather. It speaks quietly about wealth, family, profession, and even personal ambition. A group of young men walks past you, their robes, made of fine wool, dyed deep shades of blue and crimson. Their sleeves hang wide and loose, swaying gently with each step. The fabric catches the sunlight in a soft glow that suggests careful tailoring and considerable expense. In Renaissance Florence, clothing often acts almost like a social announcement. The quality of cloth, the richness of colour, and the complexity of decoration all communicate information about the wearer. Even the smallest details can carry meaning. One well-documented fact about the city is that the government regularly passed regulations designed to control excessive luxury in clothing. These laws, known as sumptuary laws, attempted to prevent citizens from displaying wealth too extravagantly. Officials worried that dramatic displays of fashion might encourage rivalry or social resentment. Despite these rules, Florentines develop creative ways to show their status. A wealthy merchant might choose a particularly rare shade of dye. Another might add delicate embroidery along the edges of sleeves or collars. Even the way a cloak is draped across the shoulder can send subtle signals to those who know how to read them. You pause near a small fabric stall where a merchant displays bolts of cloth in soft folds across a wooden table. Velvet silk and finely woven wool rest beside one another like layers of colour. Your hand brushes across a piece of crimson velvet, and the texture feels almost impossibly smooth. These luxurious fabrics often arrive through extensive trade routes. Silk, for instance, travels from regions far to the east before reaching Italian markets. Merchants carefully guard these materials because a single length of fine cloth can represent a substantial investment. A tailor working inside a nearby shop sits bent over a garment, stitching with slow precision. His fingers move quickly despite the tiny needle. Tailoring is an important profession in Florence. A skilled tailor can transform expensive fabric into clothing that fits perfectly and enhances the wearer's appearance. As you watch, a young apprentice holds up a sleeve decorated with narrow bands of gold thread. The tiny lines shimmer faintly in the afternoon light. You notice that women's clothing often features layered gowns with fitted bodices and flowing skirts. The fabrics drape gracefully as they move through the streets. hair is carefully arranged, sometimes braided, and sometimes partially covered by delicate veils. Jewelry adds another layer of meaning. Rings, brooches, and necklaces often indicate family connections or personal wealth. Some garments even carry hidden symbolism. Colours may represent family alliances or personal achievements. Understanding these signals requires familiarity with Florentine society, much like recognizing the subtle uniforms of different professions. One small observation recorded in various Renaissance paintings involves the popularity of detachable sleeves. Instead of sewing sleeves permanently into a garment, some outfits allow them to be tied on with ribbons. This clever design lets the wearer change the appearance of an outfit without replacing the entire garment. You imagine how convenient that must be for a fashionable Florentine hoping to keep up with changing trends. Nearby, a group of women discusses fabrics with animated enthusiasm. One holds a piece of pale blue silk against the sunlight, examining how the colour shifts as it moves. Another suggests adding decorative trim along the neckline. Fashion conversations here can become almost as lively as political debates. Yet clothing also reflects the strict social structure of the time. Certain materials and colours are reserved for specific classes. A labourer dressed in simple wool would never appear in the same garments worn by a powerful merchant or noble family. Even so, clever citizens occasionally push the boundaries of these expectations. One interesting curiosity mentioned in some historical letters involves young Florentine men who compete quietly through fashion. They attempt to outdo one another with increasingly elaborate sleeves or finely cut cloaks, turning everyday clothing into a subtle form of rivalry. Whether these competitions are friendly or somewhat serious likely depends on the personalities involved. Renaissance Florence, after all, is a place where pride and ambition often walk side by side. You step away from the fabric stall and continue through the street. The sunlight has softened slightly now as the afternoon advances. A pair of students passes you carrying books beneath their arms. Their clothing is simpler, but still neat and carefully arranged. Education is becoming an increasingly valued pursuit in Florence. Schools and academies nurture a growing interest in classical knowledge, philosophy, and literature drawn from ancient Greek and Roman sources. Some observers believe this intellectual movement, often called humanism, plays a crucial role in shaping the creative energy of the Renaissance. By studying ancient texts, scholars begin to explore new ideas about art, science, and the nature of humanity itself. You watch the students disappear around a corner, still deep in conversation about their lessons. The city feels thoughtful, now almost reflective, beneath the warm afternoon light. And ahead beyond these streets of silk and scholarship, quiet rooms, filled with books and eager minds, wait to continue the long conversation between past and future. Soon you will step into those spaces where knowledge is carefully studied and shared. You follow the two students around the corner, curious about where their conversation might lead. The street grows quieter here, and the buildings feel slightly different from the bustling market lanes. The doors are smaller, the windows wider, and in several places you see wooden shelves stacked with books. Florence in the early 1500s has developed a deep love for learning. Not the loud learning of crowded debates, but the patient study of texts, languages, and ideas that stretch back thousands of years. The students stop outside a modest building where a few others are already gathered. One of them pushes open the door and steps inside, and you follow quietly behind. The room smells faintly of parchment and ink. Wooden desks line the walls, and a long table stands in the centre. Candles burn in iron holders, even though sunlight filters through the windows. Good lighting is essential when reading handwritten texts. A teacher stands near the table holding a worn manuscript. His robe is simple but carefully arranged, and his voice carries clearly through the room as he begins to read aloud in Latin. Latin is the language of scholarship across much of Europe during this time. Students who wish to study law, philosophy, theology, or science must first master it. Lessons often involve reading classical authors such as Cicero, Virgil, or Aristotle. One commonly accepted historical point is that Florence becomes one of the centres of the humanist movement. Humanism encourages scholars to return to the writings of ancient Greece and Rome, studying them not only for religious insight, but also for lessons about ethics, politics, and human nature. These ideas begin to reshape education. Students here learn grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy. The goal is not only to memorize facts, but also to develop thoughtful, well-spoken citizens who can participate in civic life. The teacher pauses and asks a question about a passage. One student stands and responds carefully, choosing his words with great care. The others listen closely, occasionally nodding or whispering small comments to one another. Education in Renaissance Florence often begins in childhood for boys from wealthier families. They first attend basic grammar schools where they practice reading and writing. Later, they may study with private tutors or join academies that explore philosophy and literature. Girls receive far fewer formal education opportunities, though some daughters of wealthy families learn to read, write, and play musical instruments within the household. You move quietly along the wall where several books rest on a wooden shelf. Books in this period are precious objects. Some are still copied by hand, page on page by skilled scribes. However, a relatively new invention is beginning to change the world of learning. Printing presses, first introduced in Europe during the mid-15th century, allow books to be produced more quickly and in larger numbers. Florence soon becomes one of the cities where printed texts circulate among scholars and students. This development gradually expands access to knowledge. You pick up a small printed volume resting on the table. Its pages feel slightly rough beneath your fingers, the ink pressed firmly into the paper. The letters appear crisp and uniform, unlike the flowing variations of handwritten manuscripts. Across the room, the teacher begins discussing a philosophical idea drawn from ancient sources. The students lean forward, intrigued by the conversation. Humanist thinkers often explore questions about virtue, citizenship, and the nature of a good life. They believe that studying classical authors can help individuals develop wisdom and moral character. The discussion grows lively as several students offer their own interpretations. Nearby, you notice a small globe resting on a shelf. Its surface shows a rough map of the known world. Europe and the Mediterranean appear clearly, while distant regions fade into uncertain shapes. During the Renaissance, geographic knowledge is expanding rapidly. Explorers and merchants bring back reports from distant lands, and mapmakers attempt to incorporate these discoveries into their charts. Some scholars debate how accurate these early maps truly are. The outlines of continents remain uncertain, and rumours of new territories often circulate long before they can be confirmed. One curious detail occasionally mentioned in records of Renaissance classrooms involves the presence of trained parrots. Wealthy collectors sometimes keep these colourful birds as exotic pets, and a few accounts describe parrots repeating phrases of Latin they overhear from students. Whether these birds truly mastered the language or simply mimicked sounds remains a topic that fascinates modern historians. You smile at the thought of a bright green parrot reciting philosophical quotations while students struggle with grammar exercises. The lesson gradually comes to an end. Students gather their books and scrolls, tying them with small cords before slipping them into leather satchels. Outside, the sun has moved lower in the sky, casting longer shadows along the street. Education may happen in quiet rooms like this, but its influence spreads throughout the city. Many of the artists, architects, and political thinkers of Florence draw inspiration from the ideas discussed in these classrooms. Ancient philosophy blends with new creativity, forming a powerful current that flows through the Renaissance. You step back into the street as the students disperse in different directions. Some head toward workshops, others toward family homes, and a few continue debating their lesson as they walk. The city feels thoughtful again, humming with ideas as much as with commerce. And not far away, inside studios filled with pigments and marble, artists are turning those ideas into images that will one day astonish the world. Soon you will return to those studios and watch creativity unfold before your eyes. You leave the quiet classroom behind and continue along the street, where the thoughtful murmur of scholarship slowly fades into the sharper sounds of craft and ambition. Florence in the Renaissance does not separate knowledge from creativity for long. Ideas travel quickly from books into workshops, from philosophical discussions into paintings and sculptures. Before long, you find yourself in another artist's quarter. The street is alive with activity. Doors stand open, allowing sunlight to spill into workrooms, filled with the smell of wood shavings, damp plaster, and crushed pigments. Apprentices move quickly between benches, carrying tools, jars, and bundles of cloth. You pause outside a large studio where several painters are at work. Inside the space feels almost like a small laboratory of colour and form. Wooden panels lean against the walls. Half-finished paintings rest on easels. A long table holds jars of pigment in shades that seem almost too vivid to be real. Deep blues, glowing reds, earthy greens, and pale yellows sit in small bowls waiting to be transformed into images. One detail widely acknowledged by historians is that Renaissance painters often prepared their own pigments. Many colours were made by grinding minerals or natural substances into powder and mixing them with binding agents such as egg yolk or oil. Some pigments were remarkably expensive. Ultramarine blue, for example, was created from the mineral lapis lazuli, which was imported from distant regions of Central Asia. Because of its rarity and cost, artists frequently reserved this brilliant blue for the most important parts of a painting, such as the robes of the Virgin Mary. An apprentice carefully grinds a fragment of stone into powder using a smooth stone tool. The grinding motion produces a faint scraping sound that blends with the murmur of conversation across the room. Nearby, the master painter studies a sketch pinned to the wall. The drawing shows a group of figures arranged in a graceful composition. He gestures toward one apprentice, offering quiet instructions about shading and perspective. Perspective is one of the revolutionary techniques that flourishes during the Renaissance. Artists begin using mathematical principles to create the illusion of depth on flat surfaces. By carefully arranging lines and angles, they guide the viewer's eye into the painted space. The effect can be astonishing. Figures appear to stand within believable environments, rather than floating against flat backgrounds, as they often did in earlier medieval art. You watch as an apprentice applies a thin layer of paint to a wooden panel. The brush moves slowly and patiently. Each layer must dry before the next one can be added. Creating a major painting may take months or even years. On the far side of the room, another artist works on a large sheet of paper filled with anatomical sketches. Muscles and bones appear in careful detail. The lines are precise, almost scientific. Some artists of the Renaissance show intense curiosity about the structure of the human body. A few even study anatomy, through dissections in order to understand how muscles move beneath the skin. Exactly how widespread this practice was among artists remains a subject of lively discussion among modern researchers. What is clear, however, is that Renaissance art begins to display a new level of anatomical accuracy. You walk deeper into the workshop, where a sculptor has placed a small clay model on a table. The figure stands no taller than your hand, but is shaped with remarkable grace. These small models, often called maquettes, help sculptors plan their larger works. By experimenting with clay, first the artist can refine the pose and proportions before committing to marble or bronze. The sculptor rotates the model slowly, studying how the light falls across its surface. One intriguing anecdote recorded in Renaissance workshop writings suggests that artists sometimes competed quietly with one another. When a rival unveiled a new painting or sculpture, others might visit the studio to examine it closely, hoping to learn the techniques behind the work. These visits were not always entirely friendly. Pride and ambition ran deep among Renaissance creators, and the desire to produce something extraordinary often fueled intense rivalry. As you watch the sculptor, another apprentice enters carrying a block of marble no larger than a suitcase. Even this modest piece of stone feels heavy when he sets it down. Marble arrives in Florence from the famous quarries of Carrara, where workers carve enormous blocks from the mountainside. Transporting these stones across rough terrain to the city requires careful planning and strong teams of animals. Yet the journey is worth the effort. Carrara marble is prized for its bright colour and smooth texture, making it ideal for sculpture. You glance around the workshop once more. Paintings, sketches, tools and half-finished sculptures surround you like fragments of imagination waiting to become reality. This is where the Renaissance truly lives. Not only in grand palaces or libraries, but in these busy rooms where artists experiment, revise and try again. Outside the window, the afternoon sun has begun to soften. The light enters the studio at a gentle angle, illuminating the floating dust of marble powder in the air. The master painter sets down his brush and studies his work in silence. Perhaps he is imagining how future generations might see it. Or perhaps he is simply thinking about the next stroke of colour. You step quietly back into the street, leaving the workshop humming behind you. Florence continues its restless dance of art, trade and thought. Yet beneath this beauty and creativity, the city also holds a quieter world of alliances, rivalries, and whispered negotiations that shape its destiny. Soon you will begin to hear those whispers. You step away from the workshop district, the scent of paint and marble dust fading behind you. The streets ahead grow quieter again, but not in the peaceful way of a household courtyard. This quiet feels watchful. Florence may appear calm on the surface, yet beneath its beauty runs a steady current of political manoeuvring. The street curves gently until you reach a smaller square lined with stone benches. A few men sit together, speaking in low voices. Their conversation pauses briefly as you pass, then resumes once you move beyond earshot. Politics in Renaissance. Florence rarely happens only inside government halls. Much of it unfolds in conversations like these, scattered across taverns, markets, churches, and quiet corners of the city. Florence officially calls itself a republic. In theory, citizens participate in governing through councils and elected offices. The city's political structure includes groups such as the Signoria, a governing body made up of representatives chosen from various guilds. This system developed over generations and reflects the influence of Florence's powerful merchant class. Guilds representing trades such as wool production, banking and metalworking play a central role in civic life. However, the balance of power is rarely simple. While the Republic maintains formal institutions, influential families often guide events behind the scenes. Wealth, reputation, and alliances can shape decisions just as strongly as official votes. You walk toward the Palazzo della Signoria, the imposing fortress-like building that houses Florence's government. Its tall tower rises sharply above the surrounding square, casting a long shadow across the pavement. The building's design communicates authority. Thick walls, narrow windows, and a commanding presence remind visitors that important decisions are made here. In front of the palace, citizens gather in small clusters discussing the latest developments. A messenger arrives carrying documents sealed with wax, and several officials hurry inside. A commonly accepted understanding among historians is that Florentine politics during the Renaissance often involved delicate negotiations between rival factions. Different families and guilds competed for influence while trying to maintain the appearance of civic unity. These rivalries sometimes led to dramatic confrontations. Earlier generations of Florentines experienced moments when powerful families were exiled from the city, only to return years later when alliances shifted. Political fortunes here could change as quickly as the weather. You sit for a moment on one of the stone benches along the square. From here you can observe the steady flow of civic life. A group of clerks emerges from the palace, carrying large account books. Their work involves tracking taxes, trade agreements, and financial obligations that support the city's operations. Nearby, a pair of soldiers stands near the entrance, their armour reflecting faint glints of sunlight. The square itself serves as both a gathering place and a stage for public announcements. Decrees may be read aloud here so that citizens understand new laws or policies. One curious anecdote preserved in certain Florentine chronicles describes how political messages sometimes spread through poetry or satire. Writers composed clever verses that commented on current events, passing them discreetly through the city. Some of these poems were humorous, while others carried sharp criticism of powerful figures. Whether these literary jabs truly influence political decisions remains uncertain, but they reveal how lively public opinion could be. Across the square, you notice a sculpted statue standing near the palace entrance. Public sculptures often carry symbolic meaning. They represent ideals such as strength, justice, or civic pride. Florence takes great pride in displaying artwork within its public spaces, blending politics with artistic expression. A pair of young men near the fountain speaks animatedly about a recent council decision involving trade regulations. Their discussion becomes increasingly intense as each tries to convince the other. Political debates here are rarely dull. Some modern scholars continue to explore how democratic Florence truly was during this period. While citizens participated in government through councils and guilds, the influence of wealthy families and powerful networks often shaped the final outcomes. The truth likely lies somewhere between ideal republic and strategic oligarchy. As the afternoon continues, the square grows busier. Merchants pass through on their way home from the markets. Messengers hurry between buildings carrying sealed letters. The city never seems entirely still. You rise from the bench and walk slowly across the square, glancing once more at the tall tower above the palace. Its bells will ring again later, marking another chapter in the daily rhythm of Florence. For now, the political heart of the city beats quietly behind those stone walls. Yet life in Florence is not only about debates and alliances. Soon the mood of the streets will shift again. Music, laughter, and celebration are never far away in this vibrant city, and before long you will find yourself among crowds gathering for a festival that fills Florence with colour and sound. You leave the political square behind and follow a street where the mood begins to change once again. Florence is a city that moves through many different atmospheres in a single day. quiet study turns into busy commerce. Serious political discussion gradually gives way to something lighter. Ahead of you, the sound of music drifts through the air. At first, it is faint, a distant rhythm carried on the breeze. Then the sound grows stronger as you approach another piazza. Laughter mixes with the music, and the streets become more crowded with people moving in the same direction. Florentines love festivals. Religious holidays, civic celebrations, seasonal events, and family occasions all provide reasons for gatherings filled with music performances and elaborate displays. These festivals break the rhythm of daily labour and offer citizens moments of shared joy. You step into the square and find it already buzzing with activity. Colourful banners stretch between buildings, fluttering gently above the crowd. Musicians stand near the fountain, playing flutes and drums while children dance in loose circles around them. A group of performers in bright costumes prepares for a theatrical display. One widely documented feature of Florentine culture is the tradition of public pageants. These performances often combine music, poetry, costumes, and symbolic storytelling. Some pageants celebrate religious events, while others honour political victories or seasonal changes. The performances can be surprisingly elaborate. Actors might portray characters from biblical stories, classical mythology, or famous historical moments. Their costumes are decorated with fabric ribbons and painted masks that shimmer in the sunlight. You find a place near the edge of the square where you can watch comfortably. A group of young musicians begins a lively tune using lutes, tambourines, and small pipes. The melody dances through the air, quick and cheerful. Several couples step forward and begin moving to the rhythm. Dancing in Renaissance Florence often involves graceful patterns rather than wild spinning. Partners move carefully through rehearsed steps, bowing slightly and circling one another with quiet elegance. Nearby, a vendor sells roasted nuts wrapped in small paper cones. The sweet smoky aroma drifts across the crowd. You notice how people from many different walks of life gather here together. Merchants, craftsmen, students, and noble families all stand side by side watching the performances. Festivals create rare moments when the city feels unified. A small stage has been set up at the far end of the square. A troupe of actors begins performing a comedic scene involving a boastful soldier and a clever servant who repeatedly outsmarts him. The audience bursts into laughter as the servant delivers exaggerated expressions and playful gestures. Street theatre becomes an important form of entertainment in Renaissance cities. These performances combine humour, storytelling, and social commentary in ways that appeal to wide audiences. Some scenes gently mock everyday frustrations, such as stubborn officials, greedy merchants, or overconfident soldiers. Whether the performers ever worry about offending powerful figures is an interesting question that researchers occasionally explore. Public satire certainly exists, though actors often rely on clever wording and exaggerated characters to keep their humour safe. As the play continues, a group of children nearby begins flying small decorative kites made of paper and string. The colourful shapes bob and dance above the crowd like floating birds. You hear someone mention an upcoming festival connected to the Florentine calendar called the Calcio Storico Games. These matches combine elements of football, wrestling, and pure chaos. Teams representing different neighbourhoods compete in a spirited contest that draws enormous crowds. The games can become quite intense. Some observers describe them as athletic competitions, while others see them as theatrical displays of neighbourhood pride. Either way, they reflect the energetic spirit of the city. A curious detail recorded in several festival accounts involves the occasional appearance of elaborate mechanical devices. Engineers sometimes design moving stages, rotating platforms, or flying machines that lift performers above the crowd during certain pageants. Whether these devices always function smoothly is another matter entirely. There are stories of mechanical angels that refused to descend properly, or stage contraptions that creaked alarmingly in mid-performance. Still, the audience usually responds with delight. The afternoon sun begins to sink lower, bathing the square in warm golden light. Shadows stretch across the pavement while the music continues. You watch as dancers spin gently across the open space, their colourful clothing catching the fading sunlight. Festivals remind everyone that life in Florence is not only about work or politics, it's also about shared experiences, laughter, and the joy of gathering together. Gradually, the performers begin packing away their instruments. Some families start drifting back toward their homes, while others remain in the square, chatting and enjoying the final moments of the celebration. You step quietly away from the crowd and return to the narrower streets. The evening air feels softer now, and the city is slowly preparing for the next chapter of its daily rhythm. Soon, conversations will turn toward family matters, relationships, and the complicated arrangements that shape Florentine households. Because in this city, love and marriage are rarely simple affairs. You leave the fading music behind and wander into a quieter residential street, where the evening air carries the softer sounds of daily life settling down. Florence is still awake, but its energy has shifted again. The loud excitement of festivals gives way to quieter conversations drifting through open windows. You pass a doorway where two families sit together on stone benches built into the wall. A lantern glows beside them, casting a gentle circle of light across their faces. Their discussion seems warm but serious, the kind of talk that often happens when families gather at the end of a long day. In Renaissance Florence, marriage is rarely left to chance. For many households, especially among merchants and professional families, marriage represents a carefully planned alliance. Parents negotiate arrangements with other families, discussing dowries, property, and social standing long before the couple themselves may have much say in the matter. A well-established historical observation shows that dowries play a central role in Florentine marriage customs. A bride's family provides a financial gift, often in the form of money, property, or valuable goods, which help support the new household and strengthen ties between families. The size of the dowry can influence the match significantly. Wealthier families may offer large sums that open doors to influential alliances. For families with fewer resources, arranging a favourable marriage requires careful negotiation. You continue walking and notice a small group gathered near another doorway. An older woman speaks with calm authority while a younger couple listens closely. The conversation appears to involve planning rather than romance. Many Florentine marriages begin this way through family discussions and formal agreements. Once the details are arranged, the couple enters a betrothal period that confirms the union. The wedding itself can become a lively celebration. Guests gather for meals, music and dancing, while the bride often wears elaborate garments decorated with jewels or embroidered fabric. However, daily life after the celebration is usually far more practical. You pause beside a window where a mother quietly teaches her daughter how to embroider a pattern into cloth. Skills like sewing, household management and budgeting are considered essential preparation for married life. Florentine households depend heavily on careful organisation. Managing servants, preparing meals, and keeping financial records all require steady attention. Across the street, a group of young men strolls past, laughing as they discuss a recent festival performance. Courtship in Florence often unfolds through small gestures and carefully observed encounters in public spaces. A young man might compose a poem praising a woman's beauty or send a symbolic gift such as flowers or fruit. Conversations happen under watchful eyes, and reputations remain extremely important. One charming note found in several Renaissance letters describes how young Florentine lovers sometimes exchanged small tokens of affection. Rings, ribbons, or embroidered handkerchiefs could carry personal meaning between couples. Whether every such gift truly represented deep romance or simply polite courtship etiquette is something historians still explore when studying Renaissance relationships. You reach a small square where a fountain trickles softly in the evening quiet. Two newly married couples walk slowly across the plaza, their conversation gentle and relaxed. Marriage in Florence brings both opportunity and responsibility. Families expect couples to strengthen alliances, manage property, and raise children who will continue the family name. For women, marriage often means leaving their childhood home to join their husband's household. This transition can feel both exciting and uncertain. For men, marriage frequently marks the moment when they assume greater responsibility in business or civic life. Yet love itself still finds ways to grow within these arrangements. Some surviving letters between Renaissance couples reveal genuine affection and companionship that develops over time. Partners share stories of family life, financial concerns, and the small joys of raising children. Not every marriage is perfectly harmonious, of course. Like any human relationship, these unions carry moments of tension and disagreement. Still, family remains the foundation of Florentine society. As you continue walking, you notice lanterns appearing in more windows as night approaches. The city glows softly now, illuminated by scattered points of warm light. Some families gather for evening prayers. Others finish their meals or prepare beds for the night. A curious detail occasionally mentioned in Renaissance household records involves a custom of presenting newly married couples with decorative furniture or household goods. Painted chests, carved chairs, and embroidered linens often accompany the dowry, helping the new household begin its life with dignity and comfort. These objects sometimes survive for generations, carrying family history quietly through time. You pause once more beside the fountain and listen to the gentle sound of water. The conversations around you have softened into murmurs as evening deepens. Florence feels calmer now, but the city never completely rests. Even tonight, physicians prepare strange remedies, scholars read by candlelight, and guards patrol the streets beneath the moon. Soon you will encounter another fascinating part of Renaissance life, the world of medicine, a place where science, tradition, and a surprising amount of experimentation come together in ways that might make modern visitors raise an eyebrow. You leave the quiet fountain behind and follow a lantern-lit street where the air carries the faint scent of herbs. Evening has settled across Florence now. The sky above the rooftops glows deep blue and windows shine with warm candlelight. Most citizens are returning home, yet certain professions are only just beginning their work. One of those professions waits ahead of you. You arrive at the doorway of a small apothecary shop. Its wooden sign creaks gently in the night breeze, painted with the image of a mortar and pestle. A soft yellow light spills from the window, illuminating rows of glass bottles and ceramic jars arranged neatly on shelves. You step inside. The shop smells wonderful and slightly mysterious. Rosemary, lavender, mint, and unfamiliar spices blend together in the air. Bundles of dried plants hang from wooden beams overhead like quiet decorations. The apothecary stands behind a wide work table, grinding something carefully in a stone bowl. He glances up and nods politely before returning to his task. Medical care in Renaissance Florence often involves physicians, surgeons, and apothecaries working together. Physicians study classical medical texts, especially the writings of ancient Greek and Roman authors such as Galen and Hippocrates. Surgeons perform physical procedures, while apothecaries prepare medicines from herbs, minerals, and other substances. A commonly recognized point in medical history is that Renaissance doctors often follow the theory of the four humours. According to this belief, the human body contains four essential fluids, known as blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Good health depends on keeping these humours balanced. If illness appears, physicians attempt to restore balance through diet changes, herbal remedies, or occasionally bloodletting. The apothecary lifts a jar and pours a small amount of powder onto the table. The substance is pale green and smells faintly bitter. He explains to a nearby customer that this mixture contains ground herbs believed to help with stomach discomfort. The customer nods thoughtfully before purchasing a small packet wrapped carefully in paper. Shelves around the room hold ingredients gathered from many places. Some herbs grow locally in Tuscan hills, while others arrive through trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean. You notice labels written in careful script: sage, fennel, thyme, wormwood, and dozens more. Each plant carries a reputation for certain healing properties. Near the window stands a large ceramic container filled with something darker and more unusual. The apothecary explains that it contains powdered mineral used in certain treatments. Medicine during this era blends practical observation with inherited tradition. Physicians study ancient texts closely while also learning from their own experiences with patients. At a small desk near the wall, a young assistant copies notes into a ledger. Recording remedies and treatments helps practitioners remember which combinations of herbs appear most effective. A fascinating detail recorded in several Renaissance medical manuals describes the popularity of theriac, a complex medicinal mixture containing dozens of ingredients. Some versions include herbs, spices, honey, and even powdered snake flesh. The preparation of theriac becomes a carefully controlled process, sometimes performed publicly, so citizens can witness the ingredients being combined. Whether theriac truly provided the powerful healing effects people hoped for remains a question that modern researchers continue to examine with curiosity. You walk toward another table where a physician studies a small stack of handwritten notes. Patients often visit doctors at home rather than in hospitals. Hospitals do exist in Florence, but many serve more as charitable institutions for the poor or travellers. Wealthier citizens usually prefer private consultations. The physician explains to a patient that diet plays a significant role in maintaining health. He recommends lighter foods, fresh vegetables, and moderate exercise. Renaissance medicine frequently connects physical health with lifestyle habits. Sleep, diet, emotional balance, and seasonal changes are all believed to influence the body's well-being. On a nearby shelf, you notice several curious objects, including a small glass container holding something that looks like a dried insect. The apothecary smiles when he sees your puzzled expression. Some treatments use unusual ingredients believed to carry special properties. Ground pearls, powdered coral, or certain insects occasionally appear in old recipes. How effective these ingredients truly were remains a subject that historians of medicine still investigate. Outside the window, the night deepens. A lantern passes by as someone walks along the street. Florence has grown quieter, yet the apothecary continues preparing remedies by candlelight. Illness does not follow a schedule. You thank the apothecary and step back into the cool night air. The sky above the city now glitters with a few early stars. The streets feel different after dark. Shadows stretch across doorways, and the sounds of footsteps echo more clearly against the stone. Not everyone wandering the city at night has good intentions. Florence, like any busy urban centre, must also deal with crime and justice. And somewhere ahead, the city guards are already beginning their watch. You step farther into the nighttime streets of Florence, and the city feels noticeably different from the lively atmosphere of the afternoon. The crowds have thinned. Lanterns glow softly beside doorways, casting warm circles of light onto the cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks and the sound echoes along the narrow walls. Night in Renaissance Florence brings a quiet tension. Most citizens prefer to be indoors once darkness settles. Without modern street lighting, the city becomes a maze of shadows and dim corners. Only a few lanterns flicker along the streets, leaving long stretches where the moon and stars provide the only illumination. You hear the steady footsteps of a patrol approaching. 2 city guards walk slowly down the street carrying lanterns and long staffs. Their presence is meant to reassure residents that order is being maintained. One guard nods politely as he passes his lantern, briefly lighting your path. Maintaining law and order in Florence falls largely under the responsibility of city officials known as the podesta and various magistrates. These officials oversee investigations, trials, and punishments for those who break the law. Florence keeps careful records of legal cases. Documents preserved from the period reveal a wide range of offences, from minor disputes between neighbours to more serious crimes, such as theft or fraud. The city also relies heavily on public reporting. Citizens are encouraged to report suspicious behaviour or criminal activity to authorities. As you walk past a small square, you notice a wooden notice board attached to the wall. These boards sometimes display official announcements, warnings, or legal decrees. Nearby stands a heavy iron structure that catches your attention. It is a set of stocks used for minor punishments. Individuals accused of certain offences may be required to sit in the stocks for several hours while neighbours pass by. This form of punishment relies less on physical pain and more on public embarrassment. Florentines take reputation seriously, and being displayed in the stocks can damage a person standing within the community. You continue walking until the street opens near a government building. A torch burns beside the entrance, lighting the carved stone doorway. Inside this building, officials sometimes conduct hearings where disputes are settled. Witnesses may be called to describe events, and written testimony can be recorded by clerks. A widely accepted fact about Renaissance justice systems is that they often combine formal legal procedures with strong emphasis on community reputation and testimony. Evidence may include written records, witness statements, or even character references from respected citizens. You pause beside the doorway and imagine the conversations that have taken place here. Accusations, defences, and careful deliberations all unfolding beneath candlelight. One interesting detail occasionally noted in Florentine legal records involves the use of anonymous accusations placed into special boxes called tamburi. Citizens could submit written complaints about suspected crimes or corruption without revealing their identity. Whether this system always encouraged honesty or occasionally fueled personal grudges is something historians still explore when studying Renaissance civic life. The night air grows cooler as you move along the street. A group of workers carrying tools passes you quietly, likely returning home after a long day. Most crimes in Florence involve relatively ordinary matters. Theft of goods, disagreements over property, or disputes between business partners appear frequently in legal records. More serious offences do occur, though they are less common. Punishments vary depending on the crime. Some offenders pay fines, others may face temporary exile from the city, a penalty that can feel devastating for citizens whose livelihoods depend on Florence's trade networks. In certain cases, criminals are displayed publicly so that the community witnesses the consequences of wrongdoing. These public punishments serve both as justice and as warning. You hear another patrol approaching from a nearby alley. Their lantern light flickers against the walls as they pass through the darkness. The guards move steadily, their footsteps echoing across the stones. Their presence reminds everyone that even in a city famous for art and learning, maintaining order requires constant vigilance. A cool breeze drifts through the street, carrying the distant scent of the Arno River. Somewhere a church bell rings softly, marking the passing of another hour. Florence feels almost peaceful now beneath the night sky. Yet the city never completely sleeps. Merchants still count coins behind closed doors. Artists sketch ideas by candlelight. Guards continue their watch through shadowed streets. You turn toward the bridge, where the river reflects the faint glow of lanterns. Beyond the water lies another story that shapes Florence's influence far beyond its walls. The powerful world of trade and banking. And with it the vast network of money and commerce that connects this quiet night street to cities across Europe. You walk toward the gentle shimmer of the Arno River, where the lantern light reflects in long trembling streaks across the water. The city feels quieter here, yet the bridge ahead still carries a steady trickle of people finishing their evening errands. The Ponte Vecchio stretches across the river like a row of little houses perched above the current. Small shops cling to both sides of the bridge, their wooden shutters partially closed for the night. Even now, a few merchants remain inside finishing transactions or carefully locking away valuable goods. Florence may appear peaceful at this hour, but the city's financial life never truly rests. You pause halfway across the bridge and lean lightly against the stone railing. The water flows slowly beneath you, carrying faint reflections of torchlight from the buildings above. The wealth of Florence does not come only from its markets and workshops. Much of its influence grows from something less visible but far-reaching: banking. A widely recognised element of Florentine history is the extraordinary development of banking houses during the late medieval and Renaissance periods. Families such as the Medici build networks that allow merchants, rulers, and institutions to transfer money across vast distances without physically moving heavy coins. Instead of carrying chests of gold through dangerous roads, merchants can deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another through a system of written credit. This innovation transforms commerce. You imagine a merchant standing in a Florentine bank several centuries ago, handing over coins in exchange for a carefully written letter of credit. That letter might travel hundreds of miles before being exchanged again for money in a different city. Such systems reduce risk and allow trade to expand rapidly across Europe. You step off the bridge and follow a narrow street where several banking houses stand behind sturdy doors. During the day, these buildings bustle with clerks recording transactions in thick ledgers. Inside, long wooden tables support large account books filled with columns of neat handwriting. Each page tracks deposits, loans, partnerships, and trade agreements. The accuracy of these records is crucial. A mistaken calculation could cause serious financial confusion across multiple cities. Florentine bankers gain a reputation for reliability and organisation. Their expertise attracts clients ranging from travelling merchants to royal courts. The Medici banking network becomes particularly famous for managing financial affairs connected to the papacy in Rome. A curious detail mentioned in some merchant correspondence involves the creative ways bankers communicated sensitive information. Certain letters used coded language or unusual phrasing to disguise financial instructions in case the message was intercepted during travel. Exactly how sophisticated these codes were is something modern historians continue examining while studying Renaissance business documents. You pass a doorway where two clerks still sit by candlelight reviewing numbers. One carefully dips his pen into ink before adding another line to the ledger. The quiet scratching sound of pen against paper feels strangely soothing in the nighttime calm. Trade routes connected to Florence extend far beyond Italy. Ships carry goods across the Mediterranean, while caravans transport materials through mountain passes and river valleys. Florentine merchants deal in wool, silk, spices, metals, and countless other products. Each shipment represents a complex chain of agreements between buyers, sellers, transporters, and bankers. Money flows through these networks like the river beneath the bridge you just crossed. One interesting observation recorded in several business letters suggests that some merchants kept detailed personal notes alongside official ledgers. These notes might include observations about a partner's reliability, political events that could influence trade, or even weather conditions affecting transport. These personal records sometimes provide modern researchers with fascinating glimpses into the everyday concerns of Renaissance commerce. You reach a small courtyard where a banker closes the shutters of his office. The faint glow of his candle disappears as the wooden panels swing shut. Even financial centres must eventually rest. Yet tomorrow morning these same rooms will fill again with voices discussing shipments, contracts, and distant markets. Florence's influence reaches far beyond the city walls because of these networks of trust and calculation. You look up at the night sky where a few scattered stars appear between the rooftops. The city feels calm now, almost reflective, but night in Florence still holds surprises. As darkness deepens, the streets transform once again. Shadows stretch longer, conversations grow quieter, and the city reveals a different personality that only appears after sunset. Soon you will wander those nighttime streets and discover how Florence changes when the day finally gives way to darkness. You leave the quiet courtyard of the banking district and return towards the winding streets that lead deeper into Florence. The night has settled fully now. The sky above the rooftops is a dark velvet blue, and the few stars visible between chimneys seem to shimmer gently. The city feels slower at this hour. Lanterns hang beside certain doorways, their light flickering softly against stone walls. Many windows are now dark, though here and there you see candlelight glowing behind wooden shutters. Families are finishing their evening meals or preparing for sleep. Walking through Florence after sunset feels like moving through a different world from the busy markets of the morning. Without modern streetlights, the shadows become deeper and more mysterious. Narrow alleys twist between buildings and footsteps echo more clearly against the cobblestones. You find yourself listening carefully to every sound. A pair of travellers passes you quietly, each carrying a small lantern to light the path ahead. Lanterns are essential after dark, both for visibility and for reassurance. City officials encourage citizens to carry lights when moving through the streets at night. The glow helps prevent accidents and discourages those who might prefer to operate unseen. You turn down a slightly wider street, where a small tavern still shows signs of life. Through the open doorway, you hear the low murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of pottery cups. Inside, a few late patrons sit around a table sharing wine and stories from the day. The atmosphere feels relaxed and unhurried. Taverns often remain open well into the evening, especially in districts where travellers and merchants gather. They serve as places where news spreads quickly. A widely acknowledged element of urban life during the Renaissance is the importance of spoken communication. News travels through conversation, rumour and storytelling long before printed pamphlets become common. You pause near the doorway long enough to catch a fragment of discussion about trade shipments arriving from the coast. Someone else mentions a recent festival performance that made half the square burst into laughter. Florence at night still hums quietly with life. You continue walking and soon reach a stretch of street where the buildings lean closer together overhead. The narrow passage allows only a thin ribbon of moonlight to reach the ground. Some residents place small lamps near their windows to brighten the path below. These lights create scattered pools of illumination that guide late travellers. The quiet is occasionally broken by distant footsteps or the soft creak of wooden shutters. You pass a small group of guards making their rounds once again. Their lanterns swing gently as they walk, sending moving shadows across the walls. Keeping watch after dark is an essential task for city authorities. Patrols discourage trouble and provide assistance if someone calls for help. Records from Renaissance Florence show that night patrols follow specific routes designed to cover busy streets and important buildings. Guards report suspicious activity and ensure that fires or disturbances are addressed quickly. Fire, in particular, represents a serious concern. With so many wooden beams and open hearths inside homes, a single spark could cause great damage. You reach a small square where a fountain trickles quietly beneath the moonlight. The water reflects the glow of nearby lanterns like tiny moving stars. A man sits on the edge of the fountain, tuning a lute. He plucks a few gentle notes that float through the cool air. Music often accompanies the evening hours in Florence. Some musicians perform in taverns or during celebrations, while others simply play for their own enjoyment. You sit on the stone edge for a moment and listen. The melody is calm and thoughtful, perfectly suited to the quiet night. One curious note found in several Renaissance travel accounts describes how visitors sometimes remarked on the peacefulness of Florence after dark compared with the larger cities. While crime certainly exists, the organised patrol system and strong community awareness often help maintain a sense of order. Whether this reputation always matched reality remains something historians still discuss while examining records from the period. The musician finishes his tune and nods politely before walking away down a side street. The city seems almost ready for sleep now. Yet not everyone has ended their work for the night. In certain hidden workshops and private studios, artists and craftsmen sometimes continue experimenting long after the rest of Florence has gone quiet. Curiosity and ambition can keep creative minds awake far past midnight. You rise from the fountain and follow a narrow alley where faint candlelight glows through the shutters of a nearby building. Inside, someone is still working, and soon you will step once more into the secret world of Renaissance creativity. You follow the faint glow of candlelight down the narrow alley where the city feels almost asleep. Most windows are dark now, and the quiet hum of Florence has softened into the distant sound of footsteps and the occasional creak of wooden shutters shifting in the breeze. Yet one building ahead remains very much awake. Light flickers behind its shutters, and you hear the gentle scrape of tools at work. You step closer and notice that the door is slightly open. Inside, the warm glow of candles illuminates a studio filled with sketches, wooden frames and jars of pigment. The artist working here has clearly chosen to continue long after sunset. You step quietly into the room so as not to disturb the concentration filling the air. The studio smells faintly of oil, charcoal and varnished wood. A tall candle stands beside the work table, its flame dancing softly each time the night breeze slips through the doorway. At the centre of the room, an artist studies a canvas propped on an easel. He leans forward, brush poised carefully, adding the smallest touches of colour to a figure's face. Some painters prefer to work at night when the city grows quiet and distractions fade away. The stillness allows them to focus completely on the details of their craft. A well-documented aspect of Renaissance workshops is the constant experimentation artists pursue while refining their techniques. The period encourages creativity and innovation as painters explore new ways of representing light perspective and human emotion. This spirit of experimentation fuels much of the artistic brilliance associated with Florence. You glance around the studio and notice shelves filled with sketches of hands' faces and architectural forms. Each drawing captures a moment of observation. Artists often spend countless hours studying the world around them. They watch how shadows fall across buildings, how fabric folds along a sleeve, how expressions shift across a human face. These quiet studies become the foundation for larger works. On a nearby table sits a small wooden box containing delicate tools used for engraving and carving. Another table holds pieces of clay shaped into miniature figures. Such small models help artists plan their compositions before committing to a final painting or sculpture. A commonly recognized development during the Renaissance is the increasing use of oil paints. Earlier artists often relied on tempera, a medium made with egg yolk. Oil paints allow richer colours and smoother blending, giving painters more flexibility in capturing subtle transitions of light and shade. The artist dips his brush carefully into a small dish of colour and applies another thin layer to the canvas. The figure's face seems almost alive under the candlelight. You notice several sheets of paper pinned to the wall showing studies of the same face from different angles. This careful observation reflects a growing interest in realism. Renaissance artists strive to portray the human form with greater accuracy and emotion than earlier traditions often allowed. On another shelf sits a curious object that catches your attention. It is a small mechanical device made of wooden gears and strings. Some artists enjoy experimenting with simple machines that help them understand motion and perspective. Devices like this might assist in studying how objects move through space or how shadows fall across surfaces. Exactly how frequently such tools appear in workshops is something scholars continue to explore when examining surviving Renaissance notebooks and sketches. The artist steps back from the canvas and studies the image in silence. A faint smile crosses his face, though whether it signals satisfaction or simply another idea forming in his mind is impossible to say. Creative work often unfolds slowly. Brushstroke by brushstroke, hour by hour, the image grows more complete. Outside the studio, the night deepens further. The alley remains quiet, except for the occasional distant voice carried by the wind. You begin to notice how the candlelight changes the appearance of the painting. The warm glow adds depth to the colours, creating subtle shadows that might look different in daylight. Some artists deliberately observe their work under different lighting conditions to understand how it will appear in various settings. You step closer to the doorway and glance back one last time at the studio. Within this small room, the Renaissance continues to evolve quietly. Ideas from philosophy, science and daily life all flow into the artist's imagination, shaping new images that will one day decorate churches, palaces and homes. Florence has become a place where curiosity and creativity seem to thrive at every corner. You step back into the cool night air and gently close the door behind you. The city rests peacefully now beneath the stars. Yet change is always moving quietly through Florence. New ideas, new discoveries, and new challenges slowly reshape the future of the city. And as the first hint of dawn waits somewhere beyond the horizon, you begin to sense that this golden age will not last forever. You walk slowly away from the quiet studio, the door closing behind you with a soft wooden click. The alley returns to silence and the faint glow of candlelight fades as you step back into the deeper shadows of the street. Florence sleeps more fully now. The night air has cooled, carrying the distant scent of river water and stone. The streets that buzzed with merchants and musicians earlier in the day now belong mostly to guards, travellers and the occasional late wanderer like yourself. You follow the gentle curve of the road toward a hill where the rooftops of the city spread out below like a dark sea of tiles. From here, Florence looks peaceful. Lanterns glow like scattered stars among the buildings, and the great dome of the cathedral rises quietly against the night sky. Yet beneath this calm surface, the city stands at a turning point. The Renaissance has brought extraordinary achievements in art learning and commerce. Florence has produced painters, architects, philosophers, and bankers whose influence reaches far beyond Tuscany. One firmly established point in historical research is that the early 16th century represents both the height of Florentine cultural brilliance and the beginning of significant political change. The delicate balance that once allowed the city to flourish will soon face new pressures. You sit on a low stone wall overlooking the rooftops and listen to the quiet sounds of the sleeping city. Somewhere far away, a church bell marks another passing hour. Florence has always lived with tension between freedom and control. Its republican traditions encourage civic participation, yet powerful families continue to shape political outcomes through influence and alliances. These forces do not remain perfectly balanced forever. In the coming decades, Florence will experience shifting power structures, foreign involvement in Italian politics, and internal debates about governance. The independence that once defined the city gradually becomes more fragile. Scholars who study this period often examine the complicated relationship between the Medici family and the republican institutions of Florence. Some argue that the Medici preserved stability during turbulent times, while others believe their influence slowly transformed the Republic into something closer to dynastic rule. The full picture remains complex, shaped by many voices and interpretations. You glance across the rooftops where the moonlight reveals narrow streets twisting through the city. Despite the political uncertainties ahead, daily life for most Florentines continues much as it always has. Artists still rise early to prepare pigments and sketch new ideas. Merchants still bargain in crowded markets. Families still gather around tables to share bread and conversation. The rhythm of ordinary life continues even when history quietly changes course. A small sound behind you breaks the stillness. Turning slightly, you notice a pair of apprentices walking home from a workshop, their voices low but cheerful. They speak excitedly about a new sculpture their master has begun carving. One describes the powerful shape emerging from the marble block, while the other imagines how the finished work might astonish visitors. Their enthusiasm reminds you that creativity does not pause simply because politics grows complicated. Florence has always been a city driven by imagination. Another fascinating detail occasionally mentioned in Renaissance diaries involves how citizens themselves often sense the winds of change, long before historians later recorded them. Writers described moments when the atmosphere of the city felt subtly different, as if everyone understood that an era was shifting, even if no one could fully explain how. Whether these impressions truly reflected widespread awareness, or were simply reflections written after the fact, is something historians continue to consider. You remain seated on the wall for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around you. The dome of the cathedral glows faintly in the moonlight, still as majestic as it appeared when you first arrived this morning. Florence may face challenges in the years ahead, yet the achievements of this golden age will endure far beyond the lifetimes of those who created them. Paintings will hang in churches and palaces for centuries. Sculptures will stand in public squares long after the arguments of politicians have faded. Ideas born in the classrooms and workshops of Florence will travel across Europe and shape generations to come. You rise slowly from the stone wall and begin walking back toward the heart of the city. Far to the east beyond the hills, the first faint hint of dawn waits patiently. Soon the city will awaken once more. And before you leave Florence behind, there is time for one final walk through its streets as the morning light returns. The sky begins to soften at the edges as you walk back toward the centre of Florence. Night has not fully faded yet, but the darkness is slowly giving way to the gentle grey light that arrives just before dawn. The city feels suspended between sleep and waking. Your footsteps echo quietly along the cobblestones as you pass familiar streets from earlier in the day. The market square, where merchants shouted their prices, now lies empty. Wooden stalls stand folded and silent, waiting for another busy morning. A few pigeons wander across the stone pavement, pecking hopefully at crumbs left behind from yesterday's trade. You continue walking slowly, letting the peaceful atmosphere settle around you. Florence in these early moments feels almost private, as though the city belongs only to those who rise with the first light. The dome of the cathedral stands ahead of you again, its great curve slowly catching the pale glow of the approaching sunrise. The marble walls beneath it begin to brighten as the sky grows lighter. One well-documented reality of life in Renaissance Florence is how deeply the rhythm of the day follows the natural cycle of light. Without modern technology to stretch the hours of activity, citizens shape their lives around sunrise and sunset. Soon the city will begin its familiar routine once again. Bakers will light their ovens, apprentices will hurry toward workshops, merchants will roll open their shutters and arrange their goods for sale. Church bells will mark the first prayers of the day. You pause beside the cathedral square and listen. For a moment, everything remains still. The fountain trickles softly. A distant cart rattles somewhere beyond the narrow streets. The cool morning air carries the faint scent of fresh bread as the first ovens begin their work. Your journey through Florence has carried you across many different worlds within the same city. You have walked through crowded markets filled with spices and cloth. You stepped inside homes where families shared simple meals. You visited workshops where artists patiently shaped marble and colour into lasting beauty. You listened to scholars discussing ancient philosophy, watched musicians fill the streets with joyful melodies, and wandered through quiet alleys where candlelight illuminated late-night creativity. Each corner of Florence revealed another layer of life. An important understanding shared by many historians is that the brilliance of the Renaissance did not come from artists alone. It grew from the combined energy of merchants, scholars, craftsmen, families and patrons who together created a culture where creativity could flourish. Florence became a meeting place for imagination and opportunity. Nearby, the first bell of the morning rings gently from the cathedral tower. Its sound spreads across the rooftops, just as it did yesterday and the day before that. A baker opens his door across the square, releasing a warm cloud of scent that drifts through the cool air. An apprentice follows him carrying a basket of newly baked loaves. You realise that the cycle of daily life continues quietly, even as centuries pass and history writes its grand stories. The people of Florence likely did not think of themselves as living in a golden age. They simply woke each morning and went about their tasks unaware that their city would someday become one of the most studied places in the world. You begin walking again, following a narrow street where sunlight now touches the upper windows of the houses. A curious note recorded in some travel accounts from later centuries describes how visitors often felt a strange calm when wandering Florence at dawn. Before the crowds returned, the city revealed a quieter beauty that felt almost timeless. Whether every traveller experienced that same peaceful feeling is impossible to know, but standing here now, you can understand the sentiment. The light grows warmer as the sun slowly climbs above the distant hills. Shadows retreat from the streets and the rooftops glow softly beneath the morning sky. You pause one final time at the edge of the square and look back across the city. Florence stands, calm and patient, holding within its streets the echoes of artists, scholars, merchants and dreamers who shaped an extraordinary chapter of history. Now the city awakens again, ready to begin another day. And as you slowly drift away from these Renaissance streets, the sounds of morning bells and distant footsteps begin to soften. The streets grow quieter. The light fades gently in your imagination. Your breathing slows as the memory of Florence settles like a peaceful dream. The river continues its quiet flow beneath the bridges. The cathedral dome rests beneath the pale sky. And the city of Florence, filled with centuries of stories, slowly drifts into the distance. Rest now. Let the calm streets fade softly, and may your sleep be peaceful as the gentle bells of Florence echo quietly through the night. Now the city settles fully into the quiet space between night and morning. You remain standing for a moment in the pale light of dawn, breathing slowly as Florence awakens around you with unhurried grace. The sky above the rooftops grows softer, shifting from deep blue into the faintest shades of silver and rose. A cool breeze drifts gently through the streets, carrying the distant scent of bread baking somewhere nearby. The great dome of the cathedral watches over the city as it has for centuries, calm and steady, its curves slowly brightening as the sun prepares to rise. Pigeons flutter quietly across the square, their wings whispering through the morning air before settling again on warm stone. You begin to walk once more, though now your steps feel slower, lighter, almost dreamlike. The narrow streets that once buzzed with voices now rest peacefully. Windows remain closed. Wooden doors stand still. A single cart rolls quietly across distant stones, its wheels echoing softly before fading into the quiet. Florence feels gentle at this hour. It is easy to imagine the countless lives that have moved through these same streets. Artists carrying brushes, apprentices rushing to workshops, families sharing bread and stories by candlelight, scholars reading ancient texts while the city slept, all of it lingering here like a soft memory woven into the stones. You pause beside the river one last time. The water flows calmly beneath the bridge, reflecting the first threads of sunlight stretching across the sky. And as the light grows warmer, the city slowly drifts farther away from your thoughts. The bells of Florence ring faintly, once more softer now, like a lullaby carried across the rooftops. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders relax. The streets fade into quiet. And with the gentle echo of distant bells, the golden city of Florence slips peacefully into the background of sleep. Sweet dreams.